The Neo-Randian weekly newspaper Ergo has given us a detailed account of Miss Rand's answers during a question period following her annual Ford Hall Forum speech in Boston. Rand's remarks on the Middle East are a chilling revelation of her lack of knowledge of the concrete facts of reality, as well as a grievous betrayal of her own oft-proclaimed libertarian moral principles. Asked what the American people and the government should do about the Middle East, Rand answered unhesitatingly, "Give every help possible to Israel." Not American soldiers, she conceded, but military weapons. We need not stress here the assault on liberty involved when the US government taxes Americans in order to send arms abroad. Surely this is as statist and immoral, though not to the same degree as sending American soldiers to the Middle East. As for the American people, Miss Rand sounds for all the world like the United Jewish Appeal. Give everything you can. Give till it hurts? Reaffirming her supposed and longtime opposition to altruism, Rand added that this is the first time I have contributed to public causes. But now apparently we have a vital exception. Why? What is the overriding cause for which we must set aside libertarian principles, isolationist principles, and opposition to altruism? Why is Israel's emergency to be a claim on our hearts and pockets? Given Miss Rand's militant atheism, I'm sure it could not be the necessity for the reestablishment of the temple, or the fulfillment of the old prayer next year in Jerusalem. Given her professed individualism, it surely could not be, one hopes, the Zionist call to blood, race, and soil. So what is it? Russia is of course dragged in, but even Miss Rand concedes that the Russian threat is not the real issue here. The real issue? Because civilized men are fighting against savages. And when that happens, says Rand, then you have to be on the side of that civilized man no matter what he is. The fact that Israel is socialistic, she adds, pales in significance before this great imperative. There are two grave problems here, one of the facts of reality and one of moral principle. Factually, what does Miss Rand mean by savages? Once work through the emotional connotations of the term and the concept becomes a vague one. She explains that the Arabs are primitive and nomads. Here she betrays total ignorance of Palestine and its history. The only nomads in the region were not the Palestinian Arabs, who were driven out of their lands and homes by the Zionists, but the Jordanian Bedouins, who were hirelings of King Hussein and are in effect anti-Palestinian and pro-Israel. Palestinian Arabs were not nomads, but agriculturalists, long before Israel had made the desert bloom. The nomad theory was a convenient Zionist propaganda, and nothing more. Perhaps the Palestinian Arabs are savages because they live miserable lives in hovels in the desert, but they do so because 1.5 million of them, they were driven out of their homes and properties by the Zionists, and they remain in dire poverty as refugees. Miss Rand's strictures are chillingly reminiscent of the English, who drove out the Irish out of their farms and lands by force in the 16th and 17th centuries, and then looked down their noses at the wild, savage Irishmen who unaccountably spent their lives wandering in the forests. Miss Rand asks herself a question: why are the Arabs against Israel? Unbelievably, she answers that they resent Israel because they are savages who just do not want to use their minds. Deliberately choosing not to use their minds, they resent the superior technology and civilization of the Zionists. Surely this is the oddest explanation for Arab resentment ever penned. For what Miss Rand omits from the discussion is the 1.5 million Palestinian Arabs driven out of their homes and lands by force, to which were later added another 500,000 ruled by Zionist conquerors. A crucial omission indeed. Where is the Palestinian refugee problem in Miss Rand's attempt at explanation? Blank out. This brings us to an even more important moral question, namely, assuming that one really can define savagery, what's wrong with being a savage? Isn't a nomad or a savage a person? Doesn't he therefore possess inalienable rights? Isn't he to be allowed to own his own person and property? What happened to the great libertarian principle to which Miss Rand presumably adheres of no initiation of force against another person? If savages are people, what is the justification for initiating force against them? Or are we to amend the great libertarian axiom to read, no one is allowed to initiate force against the person or property of another, except if he be civilized and the other be a savage? But then we're on murky and dangerous ground. What if Group A is a bit more civilized and Group B a bit more savage? Is it therefore legitimate and moral for A to attack and rob B? I'm sorry to say that this is fascist ethical theory, and that therefore, in this respect, many of the charges about Randianism being fascist seem to have a certain core of truth. And yet Miss Rand says it, without going into the rights and wrongs of the case, or the aggression, or the property rights, or the liberty involved. She states flatly, when you have civilized men fighting against savages, then you have to be on the side of that civilized man no matter what he is. But surely, on any of her own apparent criteria, Soviet Russia, highly technically developed, is therefore more civilized than, say, Mongolia. Does that mean that if Russia were to attack and sweep into Mongolia, that we would all be honor bound to cheer for the Russians and to even kick in our dollars for the great cause? And if not, why not?